This is GARIS Masculist MGTOW flyers, that is 2-3 page essays on the themes of masculism and MGTOW, written by and read aloud by Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. This is flyer number 448, entitled Burning the Divorce Courts, Masculist John Brown's. Description. This flyer estimates that within a decade there will be enough masculisted men to cause a political explosion against what is happening to men in the hated, fluffy, feminist-controlled divorce courts, financially crucifying and ruining their lives. We will see the rise of several masculist John Browns who will do something equivalent to what John Brown did in the US in 1859, when he tried to steal 100,000 guns from a US armory to distribute to the negro slaves to enable their insurrection against the southern negro slavers. These modern John Browns will aim to rid the planet of modern manslavery by wiping out the fluffies, the modern day manslavers. Now the fire itself. Burning the Divorce Courts, Masculist John Browns, by Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. Email profhugodegaris@yahoo.com. Website profhugodegaris.wordpress.com. It's been 3 years since I had my last divorce, and I now live the LAT, L-A-T, that's living apart together, lifestyle. So my old anger and hatred at what happens to men in the fluffy feminist controlled divorce court system has cooled a bit. But I was watching some videos recently on the horrors divorcing men face in these courts, which resulted in my old rage rekindling. This flyer predicts what men will do about the divorce courts, since they are the major source of hatred and pain in men when it comes to being abused, and badly, by women. When one considers the size of the problem and the depth of the oppression imposed on divorcing men, one's impulse is to go to war against these courts, to pick up arms and shoot these monoconscious, fluffy feminist, hypocrite divorce court lawyers and judges who so massively abuse men. But with a bit of thought, it seems to me that such an action would be too soon. To make a historical analogy, imagine a handful of feminists in the early 1800s undertaking Emmeline Pankhurst type terrorist actions in favour of women's rights. Such actions would have seemed incomprehensible so early in that century, for the simple reason that so few people, including women, would have understood the motives behind such actions of these terrorist women. I feel that if masculists started burning down divorce courts, pushing politicians to legislate the that's paternity rejection right, etc., today, then there would be a similar reaction on the part of most people for the same kind of reason. There's not much point in being too far ahead of one's time, in brackets, which nevertheless I've spent most of my life being, close bracket. There is a lot of truth and common sense in the concept of when the time is ripe. What does that mean exactly? I assume it means when there are enough people who are angry enough to take collective action. That will not happen until there are enough people who have absorbed the new ideas that motivate them. Since all ideas by their nature are first thought up by one person, it takes time for that one person to spread his ideas to enough people to see his ideas put into action. The problem today, with millions of men being financially crucified and having his kids ripped away from him with a 90% probability when he is divorcing, is that he is not yet educated into masculist thinking, so simply assumes that what has happened to him in the fluffy feminist-controlled divorce court is simply his own individual affliction, so that he does not feel a masculist murderous rage at the massive injustice that has been perpetrated against him. So he's not motivated to pick up arms or a box of matches and burn down the divorce court that so ruined his life. But once he is intellectually armed with masculist ideas, once he knows that women have a career window of half a century, so have a powerful moral obligation to fit up rather than remain hated, fluffy, manslaving parasites, then he is much more likely to explode in a murderous masculist rage. In a FIP society, the FIP model will be used in the divorce courts. That is, when there is a dispute between a divorcing couple with kids, then it will be taken for granted by the divorce courts that both partners in the marriage are FIPs. So that there is no need for one partner, usually the man, the father, to be parasited upon by the other partner, usually the woman, the mother, forcing the man to pay for the woman, who may even be allowed by the court to manslave him for the rest of his life, with no legal nor moral obligation on her part to get off her fat parasitic ass and FIP up, so that she does not continue to parasite off his money and labour after the divorce the way she did before the divorce. With millions of men's masculist consciousnesses raised, divorcing fathers will be outraged, murderously outraged, by the idea that a woman who did not bother to FIP up when she was younger has a legal right to manslave a man for decades. To masculists, this is a war issue. It generates such hatred in men who know that women have a career window of half a century and hence have a powerful moral duty to FIP up, so that precisely she does not expect to parasite off a man, so that when she does, she becomes a major gender criminal in the eyes of the masculisted men who have had their masculist consciousnesses raised, especially young men who are now looking at potential girlfriends with a very cold eye, asking themselves, quote, "Is this woman a fluffy, a future manslaving parasite who may take me to the fluffy feminist hypocrite-dominated divorce court system and take my kids away with a 90% probability? Take my house, half my stuff, half my wealth, force me to pay child support to my kids I will then barely see, and if she's a real fluffy, force me to pay for her to sit on her fat parasitic ass and continue to live off my money?" Such women, particularly monoconscious feminists who are angry at men yet expect to be able to financially crucify their divorcing husbands, will be treated with real hatred and virulent verbal violence by masculist divorcing husbands. So great will be their sense of outrage and injustice committed against them that once there are millions of them in a population, there'll be certainly collective political action on the part of these extremely angry, murderously angry, masculisted men, who will take the law into their own hands if the divorce law itself remains in the control of the hated, monoconscious, fluffy feminists who don't give a shit about the welfare of men, who continue to abuse and rob men, seeing men as cash machines, put on this earth to pay for women to have babies. There will certainly be many very bitter confrontations between masculists and monoconscious feminists who continue to have unquestioned, unconscious, traditional expectations of men that most women have, that men's primary function is to serve women, to work for women, to be manslaves to women, to pay for women to have babies. Masculisted men will explode in rage at these monoconscious feminists, telling them that they oppress men hugely more than vice versa, given what they are doing in the hated divorce courts that these monoconscious fluffy feminists control. these feminists will become extremely frightened at this new force, this uncontrollable force of nature that is now coming from men, and not know how to react towards it other than seeing it as just more male toxicity. This failure of women, of feminists, to understand the source of masculisted men's hatred will only increase that hatred as women fail to be able to put themselves in the shoes of the men they are financially crucifying and whose lives they are destroying. So, I do wonder just how long it will take before the time is ripe. Men have been so powerfully brainwashed by parents, by schools, by movies, by society, that their traditional role in life is to be man-slaves to women, to work for women. So it will take a real sea change, a major gender role paradigm shift for men to see fluffydom as manslavery and manslavery as slavery, working for a woman for free, not being paid by her for his labour, so by definition he is manslaved, especially when the woman who is manslaving him has a career window of half a century. The massive injustice of this manslavery will in time become evident to millions of men, so that probably within a decade there will be enough masculisted men who will not tolerate that men are routinely financially crucified in the monoconscious, fluffy feminist controlled divorce courts, so will rise up and take violent political action. They will burn these divorce courts. They will express their anger and hatred of fluffy manslavery in the media and push the politicians to men-fair the gender laws, or the gender politicians will be voted out of office. Masculists will bite the fucking heads off monoconscious feminists who fail to see the massive injustices they are committing against men in the divorce courts. Since men have 10 times more testosterone in their blood than women, such men will be terrifyingly angry at such women and will scare the shit out of them, probably literally, since an extremely angry man often explodes into male violence, as many women over the century have learned when they nag their men to explosion point. Men are 3 times stronger across the chest than women, so when they are driven by female nagging and female verbal violence to explode, the women are physically smashed. Why do I talk about John Browns in the plural? For those who don't know who John Brown was, he was the guy in the US in 1859 who tried to steal 100,000 guns from a US armory and distribute them to the negro slaves, hoping they would rebel and kill their white enslavers. He was hanged 2 years before the Civil War started. It was his action that terrified the southern US states and greatly increased their resolve to secede from the Union to create their own country. What is currently happening to men in many countries which have feminist-controlled divorce courts is a hugely larger problem than Negro slavery in the US in the 1800s. As more and more millions of men become conscious that women have a career window of half a century and hence have a powerful moral duty to fit up, then today's massacring of men in the divorce courts becomes, obviously, a war issue. Quote, in italics, "No culture can crucify the lives of a quarter of its fathers and survive intact. There will be an explosion by men and a sex war unless the gender laws are men-fared, the divorce courts reformed, the that's paternity rejection right, is legislated, etc. Otherwise, there will be many John Browns who will do something similar in the 21st century to what John Brown did in the 19th century. For example, they may burn down divorce courts. They may take grenades into these courts and murder a dozen fluffy feminist divorce court lawyers and judges. They may make a blacklist of arch enemies of the men fearing of the divorce laws, etc., and then assassinate them one by one. They may even shoot prominent politicians if they don't men fear the gender laws, since so many men are being butchered in the divorce courts, millions and millions of them, routinely, day after day, one father in 4, one divorcing father in 2, has his life ruined in this fluffy feminist control, in this fluffy feminist controlled slaughterhouse run by monoconscious fluffy feminist sadists. Once millions of men see these women in these terms, sooner or later these women, these female gender politicians who see men as cash machines to be abused and robbed, will be killed in a sex war. That will be these women's just desserts. My estimation, given the rate at which men are waking up in the manosphere, of the idea that women have a career window of half a century, therefore must FIP up or be severely punished, is that probably the number of men who think this way will be in the millions in less than a decade. So I'm predicting the planet will see its first masculist John Browns within a decade from the time of writing. That's June 2021. I'm already full of masculinist hatred as a result of what is happening to men. But right now, there are too few men like me. But the times, they are a-changing. So if there are any politicians, especially gender politicians, who are watching/reading this flyer, then take note. You can avoid this masculist explosion by men fearing the divorce courts, by men fearing the gender laws, by legislating the para, etc. Otherwise, there's going to be a sex war, and lots of people, that is, lots of monoconscious, fluffy feminists, are going to be killed. Cheers. Prof. Dr. Hugo de GARIS. Email Prof. Hugo de GARIS.